I still can't wrap my head around the sheer, unmitigated audacity. She cornered me, her eyes narrowed with self-righteous fury, and demanded I issue a formal, company-wide apology. My crime? Telling a perfectly harmless joke during lunch about my uncle's spectacularly bad luck while fishing. Apparently, my story about him hooking his own baseball cap instead of a base was, wait for it, problematic. A microaggression against inept anglers everywhere? I don't even know. But here's the beautiful, karmic irony of it all. While Brenda, our newly self-appointed office commissar of wokeness, was busy trying to police my harmless anecdotes and get me written up, I stumbled onto her dirty little secret. A secret so explosive, so hypocritical, it made my fishing joke look like a nursery rhyme. She wanted an apology for hurt feelings? Fine. But I decided to give her something far more memorable instead. Exposure. Public, humiliating exposure of the actual crime she thought she'd buried forever. Stick around, because the way her world imploded was truly something to behold. Before the Brenda storm hit, my life at Sterling Solutions was honestly pretty good. Predictable, maybe, but in a comfortable way. I'm Mark, just a regular guy, early 30s, working as a project manager. It's not exactly Wall Street. We design and manage logistics software, think warehouses, shipping routes, inventory tracking. It pays the mortgage, lets me indulge my weekend hiking habit, and until recently, it was surprisingly low drama. Our department had about 15 people. A decent mix, mostly pragmatic folks focused on hitting deadlines and keeping clients happy. Our boss, Dave, was a bit old school, more interested in results than office politics or the latest HR buzzwords. He trusted us to get the job done. Lunches were casual affairs in the break room, reheating leftovers, complaining about the commute, debating whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Normal workplace stuff. There was banter, sure, maybe the occasional groan-worthy pun from Kevin in IT, but it was always lighthearted. Nobody felt like they were walking through a linguistic minefield. We were colleagues working towards common goals. We focused on the work, supported each other when needed, and left the drama at the door. It felt functional. Sane. A place where common sense generally prevailed. I valued that stability, that sense of grounded reality in my professional life. Little did I suspect that reality was about to be warped by Hurricane Brenda and her gale-force winds of wokeness. Then Brenda arrived, joining the marketing team like a missionary arriving in a heathen land, determined to convert us all. You couldn't not notice her. It wasn't just her desk, which rapidly transformed into a collage of activist posters, pronoun pins, and obscure flags. It was her entire demeanor. She carried herself with an air of quiet superiority, like she possessed a higher moral understanding the rest of us mere mortals lacked. Her email signature was practically a manifesto, complete with preferred pronouns, she/her/hers, displayed with the prominence of a royal title, links to social justice articles, and a rotating quote about dismantling systemic oppression. In a logistics software company. Right. It started subtly. A gentle reminder, in the group chat about using folks instead of guys. A sigh loud enough for everyone to hear when someone mentioned enjoying a classic movie she deemed problematic. A raised eyebrow if your lunch wasn't ethically sourced or locally grown. It was like living with a walking, talking think piece. You could almost feel the air tense up whenever she entered a room, people suddenly becoming very interested in their keyboards or the ceiling tiles. My first direct hit came during her second week. I sent out a project update, outlining some challenges and our plan to attack the problem aggressively. Standard project management jargon, meaning we'd focus resources on it. Hours later, I got a meeting invite from Brenda. Urgent, communication concerns. My stomach did a little lurch. Inside a sterile, windowless meeting room, she sat opposite me, hands folded primly. Mark, she began, her voice soft but laced with disapproval, I need to address your use of the word attack in your email earlier. I found it unnecessarily aggressive and frankly quite triggering. Language like that contributes to a hyper-masculine, potentially violent workplace culture. I stared at her. Was she serious? Brenda, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral, it's just a standard business term. It means to tackle something with priority, not actual violence. She gave me a pitying look as if explaining astrophysics to a toddler. Intent doesn't erase impact, Mark. We must be conscious of how our words land, especially on those who may have experienced aggression. I trust you'll choose more mindful language moving forward. No apology demanded that time, just a condescending lecture that left me feeling bewildered and vaguely annoyed. It was ridiculous, but I figured I'd just humor her. Avoid triggering words. Easy enough, right? Oh, how wrong I was. That was just the first tiny tremor before the earthquake. A knot of unease began to form in my gut. This woman seemed actively looking for offenses. My unease quickly morphed into full-blown frustration. Brenda wasn't content with just policing language. She seemed determined to inject her woke ideology into every corner of the office, disrupting workflows and sucking the morale out of the place like a dementor in sensible shoes. Dave's suggestion for a team-building barbecue? Shot down by Brenda's litany of concerns. Carbon footprint, potential exclusion of hypothetical vegans, accessibility issues at the park, the problematic history of public grilling spaces. The barbecue became a joyless potluck under the flickering fluorescent lights of the break room, featuring 3 different kinds of beige pasta salad and a palpable sense of awkwardness. Team building my foot. Then came the great Halloween decoration debacle. Sweet Sarah from accounting, who genuinely loved holidays, put up a few cheerful, completely innocuous decorations. A smiling ghost streamer, some plastic spiders, a cardboard black cat. Brenda lodged a complaint with HR, citing potential offense to practicing Wiccans, we didn't have any, and the trivialization of pagan traditions. Sarah, baffled and visibly upset, took them down. The office felt a little grayer after that. Brenda, meanwhile, looked quietly satisfied, like she'd won a major victory against the forces of darkness, or, plastic spiders. Her judgmental gaze seemed to be everywhere. She started carrying a small notebook, conspicuously jotting things down after interactions or meetings. People started whispering nervously, half joking about being added to Brenda's list. Casual conversations became stilted, guarded. People defaulted to talking about the weather, afraid that mentioning a football game might be seen as promoting toxic masculinity, or enjoying a steak dinner was tantamount to ecocide. The easy camaraderie that had defined our team was evaporating, replaced by a low-grade anxiety. And then came the fishing story. It was lunchtime. Me, Kevin from IT, Maria from sales, just chatting in the break room. I launched into my latest anecdote about my Uncle Barry, a man whose passion for fishing is matched only by his spectacular ineptitude. This time he'd spent a fortune on a new GPS-guided fish finder, only to somehow navigate his boat directly into a submerged shopping cart, nearly capsizing the whole vessel. We were howling with laughter. It was pure slapstick. Uncle Barry himself tells the story better than I do, usually with more dramatic flair. Suddenly Brenda, who'd been lurking in the corner nursing a cup of herbal tea, stood up. Her face was a thundercloud. Mark. A word. Now. My stomach plummeted. Oh, here we go. We stepped into the hallway. Mark, she hissed, keeping her voice low but vibrating with indignation. That story you just told. It was incredibly problematic. I sighed inwardly. Problematic? Oh. It was about my uncle hitting a shopping cart with his boat. It wasn't just about a shopping cart, she snapped. It was the way you told it. The laughter. It reinforces harmful stereotypes about bumbling, incompetent older men. It creates an unsafe environment where elders are mocked and devalued. It's casual ageism, plain and simple. I blinked, trying to process the sheer absurdity. Brenda, he's my uncle. I love the guy. He finds the story hilarious. It has absolutely zero to do with disrespecting elders. It's just funny. Your intent, she spat the word like it was poison, is irrelevant. The impact is what matters. And the impact was offensive and exclusionary. Frankly, I'm disgusted. I expect a sincere, formal apology. Not just to me but to Kevin and Maria, who were subjected to your toxic narrative. An apology? A formal apology? For Uncle Barry and the shopping cart? Something inside me snapped. The constant lectures, the fun policing, the tension she'd created. I'd had enough. Brenda, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I'm sorry you feel that way. But I am absolutely not apologizing for telling a funny, harmless story about my own family. It wasn't offensive, and frankly, I think you're deliberately looking for things to be offended by. Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed into slits. The mask of concerned wokeness slipped, revealing something cold and hard underneath. I see, she said, her voice dangerously soft. Refusing to acknowledge the harm you've caused. I'll have to escalate this. You leave me no choice. She turned on her heel and stalked off, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and apprehension. This wasn't just about sensitivity anymore. This felt personal. This felt like war. And I had a horrible feeling she was about to bring out the heavy artillery. Brenda didn't waste any time bringing out the cannons. The very next morning, an ominous calendar invite popped up. Meeting regarding workplace conduct. D. Miller, J. Riley, M. Peterson. Dave, Janice from HR, and me. My stomach twisted into a knot. She'd actually done it. She'd escalated the phishing story. Walking into Dave's office felt like walking into an interrogation room. Janice sat stiffly, holding a thin folder, her usual pleasant HR demeanor replaced with a stern frown. Dave looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, probably wrestling a bear. Brenda wasn't physically present, but her smug ghost seemed to hover in the corner. Mark, Dave began, clearing his throat awkwardly. Janice received a formal complaint from Brenda yesterday afternoon. Janice took over, her voice clipped and official. Brenda reported experiencing significant discomfort due to an incident in the break room. She alleges you shared a story that employed ageist tropes, contributing to what she perceives as an increasingly hostile work environment, particularly in light of previous informal counsel regarding insensitive language. She tapped the folder, presumably containing notes about the attack incident. I felt a surge of indignant rage. Hostile? Ageist tropes? It was a story about my uncle hitting a submerged shopping cart with his boat. He tells it at family dinners. I quickly explained the context, the harmlessness, the fact that Brenda was the only one who took offense. Janice listened, unmoved. Mark, perception is critical here. While your intent may have been harmless, Brenda perceived the story and the subsequent laughter as mocking and exclusionary. Under our company policy, we must take all such reports seriously. We need to foster an environment where everyone feels psychologically safe. Psychological safety? Was she kidding me? Brenda was the one making everyone feel unsafe with her constant accusations. So what happens now? I asked, struggling to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Am I being fired because Brenda didn't like my Uncle Barry's story? No, Mark, of course not. Dave jumped in, looking relieved to offer some reassurance. But Janice and I agree that some additional training might be warranted. A refresher course on sensitivity and inclusive communication for the whole department, he added quickly, trying to make it sound less targeted. It felt targeted. It felt like punishment. And it was official. A formal verbal warning was placed in my employee file. For failure to maintain professional decorum and lack of sensitivity towards diverse perspectives. I left that office feeling utterly demoralized and furious. The aftermath was toxic. Brenda radiated smug victory. She didn't speak to me directly, but she made sure I felt her disapproval. In meetings, she'd make pointed remarks about some people needing to educate themselves on microaggressions, always accompanied by a quick, knowing glance in my direction. Then the subtle sabotage began. Suddenly, my project reports were being returned by Dave with picky Brenda-esque comments about wording or tone that had never been an issue before. I suspected she was going to him privately, poisoning the well. During client calls, she'd interrupt me, ostensibly to offer an alternative, more equity-focused perspective, which invariably made my pragmatic solutions sound clumsy or thoughtless. It was death by 1,000 woke paper cuts. She even tried to poison my relationships with colleagues. I walked past the coffee machine one morning and heard her talking to Maria in a low, concerned voice. Just feel his negativity, you know? It makes it hard for me to feel safe collaborating. Maria mumbled something non-committal and quickly walked away, but the intent was clear. Brenda wasn't just satisfied with getting me a warning, she wanted me gone. The stress was immense. Sleep became difficult. I second-guessed every email, every comment. My productivity dipped as I spent more time navigating Brenda's invisible tripwires than actually managing projects. The easy, functional workplace I'd valued was gone, replaced by a tense, suspicious environment orchestrated by one incredibly manipulative, hypocritical individual. This wasn't about social justice. This was about power and control. But as my anger and frustration festered, a new thought began to crystallize. This much smoke? Could there be fire? Why was she so aggressively righteous, so desperate to find fault in others? What was she hiding? That's when I decided to stop playing defense. It was time to do a little digging of my own. My suspicion wasn't just wishful thinking. It was fueled by tiny inconsistencies I'd previously ignored. Now, viewing Brenda through the lens of her relentless attacks, these little oddities started to form a pattern. Her professional history, for instance, was remarkably vague. When asked directly about previous employers, she'd deflect with generic phrases like, a consulting firm back east, or, a nonprofit focused on outreach. Never specific names, never concrete details. Her examples of past marketing successes felt like they were lifted from textbooks, lacking the granular detail of real-world experience. Weird for someone supposedly senior. Then there was her almost visceral reaction to the company-wide announcement about updated background checks for everyone handling client data, a new compliance requirement. I happened to be walking past her cubicle just as the email landed. I saw her face blanch, her eyes darting around for a split second in pure, unadulterated panic before she quickly composed herself, smoothing her expression back into its usual mask of serene judgment. Why would a standard check trigger such fear in someone so outwardly virtuous? And her fixation on Sterling's financial procedures, constantly asking probing questions about invoicing, vendor payments, expense reimbursements, far beyond the typical scope of marketing. At the time, I chalked it up to ambition or perhaps nosiness. Now, combined with the background check reaction and the vague history, it felt sinister. I was done being her punching bag. My career and sanity were on the line. I wasn't going to fabricate lies or launch personal attacks like she did, but I felt completely justified in trying to understand who this person really was. If she had vulnerabilities, if her righteousness was a facade, I needed to know. My investigation started discreetly, after hours, fueled by coffee and sheer indignation. LinkedIn was the first stop. Her profile was surprisingly thin, listing only a couple of short stints at vaguely named companies that seemed to have minimal online presence, possibly defunct. There were noticeable gaps in her employment timeline, especially around 5 years ago. The background check panic gnawed at me. What do people usually try to hide? Criminal records. Financial trouble. Fake credentials. I broadened my search using public record databases, online court archives, and deep dives into archived news articles from the states she'd vaguely mentioned living in. I used variations of her name, potential maiden names, anything I could think of. For several evenings, it was a frustrating dead end. Just digital breadcrumbs of her usual online activism, signing petitions, commenting on blogs, the standard keyboard warrior stuff. I almost gave up, thinking maybe she was just genuinely unpleasant and paranoid. Then, buried deep on page 15 or 16 of search results for a regional newspaper archive from Pennsylvania, I found it. Not an article about her, initially. It was a piece detailing an embezzlement scandal at a mid-sized charitable foundation focused on youth programs. The article mentioned that a female employee in the finance department had been caught systematically diverting funds over nearly a year. The employee had been fired, arrested, and charged, but her name was withheld initially pending further investigation. My pulse quickened. I checked the dates mentioned in the article. They perfectly matched the longest, unexplained gap in Brenda's LinkedIn profile. Coincidence? Maybe. But my gut screamed otherwise. I switched tactics, searching Pennsylvania court records specifically for embezzlement or fraud cases involving the charity's name around that time frame. And there it was. Crystal clear. Commonwealth versus Brenda Marie Walters. The full legal filing. Defendant, Brenda Walters. Charges, theft by deception, embezzlement, felony class 3. My hands were actually shaking as I read the details. It wasn't petty cash. Brenda had created fictitious vendor accounts and manipulated invoice approvals, siphoning off donation money intended for underprivileged kids, directly into a secret personal bank account. The total amount stolen was just shy of $50,000. $50,000? From a charity. The records showed she eventually pleaded guilty to a lesser felony charge, likely avoiding a trial, received several years of probation and was ordered to pay full restitution. Crucially, the records indicated a significant portion of that restitution was still outstanding. Suddenly, everything made horrifying sense. The vague job history. The panic over background checks. The obsessive interest in Sterling's financials. Maybe scoping out her next target? And the relentless, performative wokeness? It was all a desperate, calculated performance. A smokescreen woven from social justice buzzwords to hide the ugly truth of her past and present herself as morally unimpeachable. Her attacks on me, on Sarah, on the barbecue, they weren't about principle. They were about deflection. Keep everyone focused on imaginary microaggressions so they wouldn't look too closely at her own macrofelony. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. This crusader against problematic phishing jokes was a convicted embezzler who preyed on charities. I meticulously downloaded and saved copies of the news article and the official court documents. I felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with disgust. I now held the key to dismantling Brenda's reign of terror. I didn't know exactly when or how I'd use it, but I knew her days of lecturing and sabotaging were numbered. The power dynamic in our little office drama had just shifted irrevocably. The perfect storm arrived just days later. Brenda, perhaps sensing she hadn't fully crushed my spirit, or maybe just needing another hit of righteous validation, decided to launch her next offensive during a critical team meeting. We were reviewing the final rollout strategy for a major software update. Dave, Janice from HR dialing in remotely, the whole project team. I finished presenting my detailed plan, including risk assessments and contingency measures. I felt confident, it was solid work. Brenda let the silence hang for a beat, then cleared her throat with dramatic effect, adjusting her ethically sourced scarf. "Mark," she began, her voice dripping with condescending concern, "while I acknowledge the time you've invested here, I must voice serious reservations about the inherent biases embedded in your risk assessment. You've failed," she emphasized the word, "to adequately consider the potential for disparate impact on historically marginalized end users during potential service disruptions." It was pure, unadulterated nonsense. Our software tracked widgets in warehouses. Downtime was equally inconvenient for everyone. This was her classic move, using woke jargon salad to derail progress and paint me as some kind of clueless oppressor. Before I could even formulate a polite rebuttal, she went for the kill shot. "Honestly, Mark, this oversight, coupled with your documented pattern of insensitive communication," she paused, letting everyone remember the phishing joke warning, "forces me to question your suitability for leading projects that require nuanced, equitable thinking. I feel ethically compelled to escalate these concerns formally to Dave and Janice once again. This recurring lack of awareness is creating an unsafe and frankly, invalidating work environment." The room went deathly quiet. Dave looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Janice's face on the monitor adopted its deeply concerned HR expression. My colleagues stared intently at their notepads, desperate to become invisible. Brenda leaned back slightly, a triumphant smirk flickering at the corners of her mouth. Checkmate, she thought. She was about to nail my coffin shut. But this time I was ready. I felt a cold, calm certainty settle over me. I met her gaze directly, holding it until her smirk faltered. "Brenda," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the thick tension. "I truly admire your unwavering dedication to ethics and accountability in the workplace. It's quite something." I let the pause hang, feeling every eye in the room shift to me. Brenda frowned, sensing the shift in tone. "Which is why," I continued, slowly reaching into my briefcase and pulling out a slim manila folder, "I find your current position so utterly baffling." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. It crackled with sudden, intense curiosity. Brenda's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of unease, no fear, crossing her features. "Baffling, Mark?" Janice asked from the screen, her voice cautious. "Yes, Janice. Baffling," I repeated, opening the folder deliberately. "Because while Brenda is here crusading against the disparate impact of potential software glitches and the violence inherent in phishing anecdotes, she seems to have a rather glaring blind spot when it comes to her own ethical conduct." Brenda went ramrod straight in her chair. The color drained visibly from her face, leaving it a sickly pale. "Mark, this is highly inappropriate," she stammered, her voice losing its confident edge, becoming thin and reedy. "This meeting is about the project and my legitimate concerns regarding your—" "Is it, Brenda?" I interrupted smoothly, sliding the first printout across the table, the archived news article detailing the embezzlement at the youth charity. "Because I suspect Sterling Solutions, a company entrusted with sensitive client operations and finances, might find it highly relevant that their senior marketing strategist, the self-appointed guardian of corporate morality, is actually a convicted felon. Specifically, I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice for dramatic effect. Convicted for embezzling nearly $50,000 from her previous employer. A charity that helped children, no less. Audible gasps filled the room. Kevin's eyes were wide as saucers. Maria covered her mouth. Dave looked utterly poleaxed. Janice on the screen just stared, speechless. Brenda shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. That's a vile lie, she shrieked, her voice cracking with panic and fury. You dug up dirt? This is defamation. Harassment. Is it defamation, Brenda? I asked calmly, placing the second document on top of the first, the official court record, her full name prominently displayed. Because Commonwealth versus Brenda Marie Walters, case number 48C whatever, seems pretty definitive. Theft by deception. Embezzlement. Probation. And if I recall correctly, I tapped the section detailing the judgment, a rather hefty restitution amount still outstanding? It must be hard making those payments while simultaneously lecturing everyone else on ethics. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Brenda's ragged breathing. She stood there, trembling visibly, her eyes darting frantically between the papers, my face, Dave's stunned expression, and the shocked faces of her colleagues. Her carefully crafted mask of woke superiority had shattered, revealing the desperate, cornered criminal beneath. The smugness was gone, replaced by raw, naked panic. Tears started streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of impotent rage and utter humiliation. Dave finally found his voice, though it was shaky. Brenda, is this true? Brenda opened and closed her mouth like a fish gasping for air. No words came out. She stared at the undeniable proof on the table, then at the circle of horrified faces. Her entire body seemed to crumple inward. I have to go, she choked out, grabbing her purse and practically bolting from the conference room, leaving a trail of stunned silence in her wake. Janice's voice crackled from the monitor, suddenly all business. Mark, Dave, please remain on the line. I'm contacting building security immediately. We need to secure her access. The tension in the room finally broke, replaced by a wave of shocked murmurs and exhaled breaths. No one mentioned the software rollout. Brenda's calculated attack, her attempt to destroy my career over nothing, had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. She came for an apology, but she got exposed. The satisfaction was deep, profound, and utterly righteous. The office tyrant had finally been dethroned. The fallout was immediate and absolute. Within the hour, security personnel quietly escorted a pale, red-eyed Brenda from the building. There was no scene, just a swift, ignominious exit, her box of activist posters and pronoun pins suddenly looking pathetic rather than principled. Dave and Janice called me back into the office later that afternoon. The mood was entirely different, apologetic and deeply embarrassed. Mark, Janice began, looking genuinely chagrined, on behalf of the company and personally, I owe you a profound apology. We completely mishandled Brenda's initial complaint against you. We allowed her performative activism and manipulation to overshadow common sense and fairness. We failed you, and we failed to see her for what she truly was. Dave nodded emphatically. Her background check. Somehow it was missed or didn't flag properly. We're overhauling that process immediately. You absolutely did the right thing bringing this forward, Mark, though I deeply regret she pushed you to the point where you felt you had no other choice. The hypocrisy is just staggering. They confirmed Brenda's immediate termination for cause, specifically for falsifying her application and the inherent conflict of interest given her conviction and role. The ridiculous verbal warning about the phishing joke was completely wiped from my record, with sincere apologies for it ever having been issued. In the days that followed, it felt like someone had opened a window in the office, letting fresh air and sunlight back in. The oppressive cloud of Brenda's judgment lifted. People visibly relaxed. Casual chatter returned to the break room. Kevin started telling his terrible puns again. Sarah from accounting put a small, cheerful vase of flowers on her desk without a hint of anxiety. Several colleagues privately expressed their immense relief, admitting they'd also felt targeted or intimidated by Brenda's constant scrutiny and complaints. Work returned to, well, work. We focused on clients, deadlines, and solving actual business problems, not imaginary social justice infractions. My projects moved forward smoothly, free from bizarre, agenda-driven sabotage. The office felt sane again. Productive. Comfortable. Looking back, the whole Brenda episode feels like a bizarre fever dream. Her entire woke persona was a carefully constructed lie, a shield built from buzzwords to hide a core of deceit and criminality. She wielded accusations of microaggressions like weapons, not out of genuine concern, but to control, manipulate, and deflect attention from her own significant failings. She demanded apologies for perceived slights while harboring a secret felony conviction for stealing from a charity. There's a deep, almost primal satisfaction in knowing her own tactics led directly to her downfall. She tried to cancel me over a joke, and ended up canceling herself by revealing her true nature. It was a stark reminder that true integrity isn't about performative righteousness or policing others' language. It's about actual character. Brenda learned that lesson the hard way. And me? I got my peaceful, productive, blessedly normal work life back. And thankfully, Uncle Barry's fishing escapades are once again safe harbor for harmless laughter.